Are we good? Okay.
home to me.
I will be home to
I
you.
will be home to you.
No one is an island.
No one is an island.
You be home to me.
You be home to me.
I will be home to
I
you.
will be home to you.
No one is an island.
No one is an island.
You be home to me.
You be home to me.
I will be home to
I
you.
will be home to
No
you.
one is an island.
One is an island.
You be home to me. I will be home to
I will
you.
be home to you.
No one is an
One
island.
is an island.
You be home
to me.
I will be home to you.
No one is an island. You be home to me. I will be home to you. No one is an island. Sing that again with us. You be home to me. I will be home to you. No one is an island. You be home to me. I will be home to you. No one is an island. I want to take a little bit of time right now just to acknowledge that there's a lot going on in the world, and it's really heavy. Violence and stuff going on in our city and across the country, all over the world. So just want to take a moment to make space for that in our hearts. Music is a good way to make space for all the things in a way that words alone doesn't do very well sometimes. So thankful for that we can come and sing together. And this song particularly is just kind of about that. Like, I don't know what's going on, but I'm trying to get through this life and have something to anchor me. So I hope that this it makes space for you like it has for me. I've been wandering through this world, looking for an anchor to hold me. I've been stumbling through this world, searching for the thread that might free me. I'm looking to you. I'm holding on to you. I'm looking to you. I'm holding on to you.
judgments are righteous and true, and your name is sweeter than the rain that falls upon the face of dry and weary land, causes us to turn our face again. Your name be praised and be lifted higher.
And be lifted higher.
And be lifted higher.
And be lifted higher.
There is no one, there is no one like you. No one like you. And every morning there are mercies new. It's your kindness brings us back to you, and your name is stronger than the pain. It's covering the shame of all these weary hands, causing us to turn our face again. It may be praised and be lifted higher.
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 Your name is stronger than the pain. It's covering the shame of all these weary hands, causing us to turn our face again. Your name be praised and be lifted higher.
And be lifted higher.
And be lifted higher.
And be lifted higher.
Love 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 be lifted higher.
Amen. You may be seated.
Hi, everyone. Let's give them a hand. That was great. Good morning, everybody. My name is Vince. I'm one of the pastors here, and a special hello to you if you are new or newer with us as you're joining us online or here in the theater. If you would like to participate in our live chat for this morning, that's one way that several people like to engage when they're with us. We're going to put a QR code up here on the screen. You can use your phone's camera to follow that, and that will take you to the free app Discord, which we use throughout the week, but also especially here on Sundays. Our moderator in the chat this morning is going to be Mark Scrimenti, so he'll be hanging out if you have a comment or if you have a question or if you need anything at all. Brownland Church, we are both a local and an online community. We're based here in Chicago, but we draw many from beyond Chicago every Sunday when we gather via online. Amazing. This church was started to help people experience a God of love, to contribute to justice and healing in the world, and to find spiritual health and community in ways that can feel elusive a lot of the time today. In particular, we started this church to help people who feel more comfortable in culturally progressive settings rather than in culturally religious settings. So perhaps you grew up in a highly religious environment, but then at one point chose to leave that, and that felt like growth to you. Those folks tend to do really well with us, or perhaps you didn't grow up at all in a highly religious environment, but you've always been sort of drawn to the spiritual. Those folks as well do really well with us here. Our guide as we do things here is Jesus. There are religious settings we are absolutely aware that present faith in Jesus as something you are either inside of or you are outside of, and that has just not been our experience here. For us, following Jesus has always made us more open and never more closed off. All right, before we get going for our message today, I am going to invite our preschoolers and our elementary age kids in the church who now have an option for their own space. So they can make their way to the back of the theater. Miss Abby and Miss Chloe will be waving their hands, and everybody can make their way to Miss Abby and Miss Chloe. They'll head over to Theater 3, where they'll have their own space for a bit, and then they'll come and join us at the end of service for communion. If you are new with our Kids Church crew, just make sure that our folks have a phone number for you in case we need to contact you. And they'll rejoin us at the end of service. So that said, Haley is joining me up here for our message this morning. Hi, Haley. How's it going?
Hello. Good morning.
Glad to have you. What are we talking about today?
Yeah, so this week we are continuing on in our theme of marking the Easter season by looking to post-resurrection stories of Jesus to guide us. So as I talked about last week, these Easter stories I think really uniquely emphasize the both and reality that we all encounter. A resurrected God who is both dead and alive, the presence of both grief and celebration, often at the same times, the intertwining of both clarity and confusion, and an ability to experience God in both mystical or spiritual ways and embodied or physical ways. So we are looking to these stories specifically to help us come to some helpful realizations about what it means to have active experiences of God, or to be in partnership with God, is how we put it last week. So what does it mean to be in hopeful partnership with an active God?
I like that. I like both and, which was the phrase that you regularly return us to. It's one of your favorite phrases.
Should probably just get it tattooed on my forehead or something at this point.
It's a life message for you. But I think that I really like the both ands that you already named for us. One other one that I think about for our church and for sort of modern people trying to be people of faith is we often say that most people experience being a skeptic and a believer simultaneously. And in the past, in previous ages, it was here are the skeptics and here are the believers, and they fight each other. But now that fight is not going on out there. The fight is going on inside of all people, and that's okay. And we can name that, and we can live into that both and. I think that's a useful one. And then the other one that I think about in terms of another both and that you brought to us last week, as we talked, you mentioned, or you were drawing from a trauma-informed therapist talking about the stories post-crucifixion and how the disciples are in trauma. They're figuring out what to do that, and I think that that's really important that we can talk about experiencing God even when we are in trauma, even when we are post-trauma, when we were exhausted, when we just had a stressful day at work, when we had a fight with our spouse, whatever. Experiencing God is on the table there. It's not that really feels tied to that both and thing. So I like that.
Yeah, I think I've been thinking a lot about what it means to be following Jesus in the midst of whatever we're experiencing instead of once we've been delivered from it or healed from it or feel like we've arrived beyond it, have conquered it, whatever it may be, but in the midst of instead.
Yep.
And so today we're going to be focusing in on how being in partnership with God requires us to expand our experiences of God. And I'll have a little nerdy moment here. Usually this is Vince's job, but I get to be the nerdy
That's
one
a
today.
cheap shot. Cheap shot. You're just as nerdy as I am.
It's true,
Yeah.
but so today I want to just talk about really briefly this ancient heresy or competing body of thought with early followers of Jesus that's called Gnosticism. And I promise you this ties in. So there are different tenets within Gnosticism that some of them actually align with a lot of early Christianity, but others are pretty problematic. And the two biggest features of this school of thought are a strict dualism between the physical and the spiritual, so really strict divide, and the idea of secret knowledge. So to put it really simply, it limited what was good and divine to only the spiritual. The body is bad.
The body is bad. That's a lot of the more ascetic traditions of the church come from that, right? Of like you lash yourself because the spirit is what's good.
Yes, spirit is good, body is bad.
Yeah.
And then this reserved access to God to a very particular group of people who possessed the secret knowledge.
Yes,
They were the awakened.
Yeah.
And I think that the church today actually still has some pretty similar tendencies.
Sure. That feels tied to what we experience today. Yep.
Yeah, because we can restrict how we experience God to these very particular categories, and we can start to see only certain people as having more access to God. And on one end, this could be like, you have to be holy enough to know Jesus. And then on the other end, it's this idea of being awakened. Like, you have to be woke enough to know the real Jesus. So it really exists along the spectrum. But I think that we may place limitations on others, or we may place limitations on ourselves and validate ourselves. Like, I'm not really experiencing God because I'm not blank enough. Fill in the blank there.
Yes.
So the hope for today is to break down some of these categories and expand our outlook beyond who is in and who is out, and what is in and what is out when it comes to our perception of our experience of God.
And what we're capable of maybe is a big thing that I think an extremely common question that I experience as a pastor is people wondering, or usually it's not wondering, it's you feel really trapped by this sense of like, why don't I have powerful hit me over the head experiences of like the people in the Bible did, or other people throughout history have reported. It must be that I am not, I'm not pious enough or holy enough, right? I'm not good at prayer like those other. I'm not knowledgeable enough about the Bible, or whatever it is, and we tell ourselves that's why we don't have experiences like that. And so I think I want to work today a different suggestion as we're thinking about expanding what we call experience of God. With the different wondering is, are the actual experiences of people in the New Testament, like we're going to read from Luke today, were they that different than the experiences that we might have today? Or are they actually quite similar, and it's just that they explain and describe them really differently? Like, obviously, we live in a totally different world, a different culture with different values and different images that hold us together and metaphors that make sense to us than the people did who were writing the New Testament, right? And modern people live what historians would call, we live within what the immanent frame as opposed to the transcendent frame, these big words, immanent and transcendent. And what that means is basically like, we live in a world that's not very enchanted, right? We don't really, when the weather is bad, we don't make a sacrifice to the gods. We, grab an umbrella. And so the immanent world is about what you can touch. It's about what you can measure. It's about what you can see right in front of you, what's immanent. Whereas a transcendent view, which would be many of ages past, would have more transcendent views, where it's like everything that's happening is always infused with the spiritual and the mystical and the transcendent. But what's interesting is like transcendence is still very much desired and possible in immanent frame. It's just that's not where we default to. But it's not like we don't care about transcendence within an immanent frame. I don't want to say that that's true about our life. Like, just think about like the stories in the movies that animate us, right? Like, it's all about like some higher, transcendent thing that's not what's right in front of us, right? There's some purpose that we're tapping into, or some superpower, right? That's on display, or even like I always think of. When we think about we live in this immanent frame, that's what we default to, but we still long for transcendence. The most, like if you can think of the most immanent thing in all of life, I think it's insurance policies. That's the most, like what matters is what's right in front of you. And you think about like companies that advertise for their insurance policies, and none of them, like their messages are not like, your possessions are what matter, right? Like none of them say that in their commercials, right? They're like, protect your stuff so that you can focus on what matters most, right? Transcendence, right? They're trying to get you to drive at something else. So it's not like in our immanent frame we don't care about transcendence. It's just that it's not the default. And that means that like we're just going to talk about our experiences differently. We're going to explain the things that happen to us differently than people who lived in a transcendent frame, like Luke, who we're about to read from the New Testament of the Bible. Maybe our actual experiences today aren't so different from those who wrote the New Testament, or those throughout history who reported massive, powerful, profound experiences of God. It's just that we explain things differently.
Yeah.
That's what I guess what I want. That's what I want to wonder as we go along.
Yeah, I think that's really helpful. That it's not necessarily our experiences of transcendence don't happen, because they do.
They do, yeah.
But our perception of them and the language that we use to describe them is going to be different.
Absolutely. Every time we're reading the Bible, we have to do that translation. We have to think, this is a transcendent world. I live in a more, the transcendent frame when they look at the world. I live in an immanent frame when I look at the world. So there's going to be some translation.
I think for me too, and maybe this is a product of the immanent framework here, but it's been more helpful to think of Jesus accompanying us within human experiences instead of needing to access this transcendence above human experiences.
Yes.
It's just a slight shift there.
Yeah.
But why don't we turn to this story that we're going to be reading today?
Great. So we're going to read from Luke chapter 24. This is a relatively famous story from the disciples post Jesus' resurrection called The Road to Emmaus. I'll read it and then he'll comment on it here. Now on that same day, two of them were going to a village called Emmaus, about 7 miles from Jerusalem, and talking with each other about all these things that had happened. While they were talking and discussing, Jesus himself came near and went with them, but their eyes were kept from recognizing him. And he said to them, "What are you discussing with each other while you walk along?" They stood still, looking sad. Then one of them, whose name was Cleopas, answered him, "Are you the only stranger in Jerusalem who does not know the things that have taken place in these days?" He asked them, "What things?" They replied, "The things about Jesus of Nazareth, who was a prophet, mighty in deed and word before God and all the people, and how our chief priests and leaders handed him over to be condemned to death and crucified him. But we had hoped that he was the one to redeem Israel." Yes, and besides all this, it's now the third day since these things took place. Moreover, some women of our group astounded us. They were at the tomb early this morning, and when they did not find his body there, they came back and told us that they indeed had seen a vision of angels who said that he was alive. Some of those who were with us went to the tomb and found out it was just as the women had said, but they did not see him. Then the stranger said to them, "Oh, how foolish you are, and how slow of heart to believe all that the prophets have declared. Was it not necessary that the Messiah should suffer things and then enter his glory?" Then, beginning with Moses and all the prophets, he interpreted to them the things about himself and all the scriptures. As they came near the village to which they were going, he walked ahead as if he were going on, but they urged him strongly, saying, "Stay with us." Sorry, let me put that back up for you. "Stay with us, because it's almost evening and the day is now nearly over." So he went in to stay with them. When he was at the table, he took bread, blessed it, and broke it, and he gave it to them. Then their eyes were opened, and they recognized him, and he vanished from their sight. I love that. Where'd you go? Okay. Then they said to each other, "Were not our hearts burning within us while he was talking to us on the road, while he was opening the scripture to us. That same hour, they got up and returned to Jerusalem, and they found the 11 and their companions gathered together. They were saying, "The Lord is risen indeed, and he appeared to Simon." Then they told him what had happened to them on the road and how he had been known to them in the breaking of the bread. Okay.
So we're going to take some time to look at this from a few different angles. But
Yeah.
before we get into that, I wanted to do a little bit of storytelling here around this idea of their eyes were opened and they recognized him. Because I think this is some way that we use the language that we've got to talk about these experiences of transcendence.
Yes.
Of like an eye-opening experience. Maybe you've had this that you can look back on and say like, oh yeah, this was a eye-opening experience I had about my understanding of God or my understanding of myself or community, things like that.
We often tie those things to that's an experience of God. That's an experience of the mystical, the spiritual, the transcendent. Yes.
It seems like something has been revealed that we didn't realize before.
It's all so meaningful. It's all so powerful, connected. Yeah.
So I wanted to share a little bit about what came to mind for me this week as I was thinking about this. And that was really my experiences traveling to India came to mind.
Okay.
So I went to the New Delhi area twice in college with an organization that doesn't quite exist in the same form now, but at the time it was called Truth Seekers International. And their main thing was using foot washing rallies as a way to connect with people and to kind of overcome the caste system in India. So we'd go and have these really big gatherings with a lot of music and flowers and food, and a team of college students and volunteers would wash the feet of those who had gathered. And it was really powerful. But I do always have some hesitancy around sharing some of my experiences in India, just knowing how complicated the idea of missions can be, and how this may bring up some different things for you and where you're coming from. And with missions, we have the range of outright problematic to really thoughtful and intentional. And I think it's important to recognize that across that full range, both beauty and harm can take place.
Yes.
Both are possible there. So our school called short-term mission trips global partnership trips with an emphasis on partnership there instead of missions. Did a lot of prep work around what it meant to partner with local leaders and organizations, things like that. But it's still hard to not think about the potentially like colonizing and the hierarchical nature of a group of mainly white students going into villages in India. It's hard to ignore that. So it wasn't perfect. But I've done a lot to unpack my own role in those trips and perception of those trips, and I'm still really grateful that I went. Another both and for us today.
Absolutely, both and, yeah. But tell us why, what stands out, and you think, I am still really glad that I did this, even as it comes with complicated feelings.
Yeah, so I think the reason specifically that this comes to mind as an eye-opening experience of God is because my idea going in of how I thought I was going to experience God and my actual embodied experiences were really different. When I think about being in Delhi, it's really just this beautiful chaos is the phrase that comes to mind. There's a ton of different religious influences there that are evident, and particularly strong cultural and religious influences of Hinduism. So I had this idea going in. This was my mindset coming in from a evangelical college and church. I had the idea that it was going to be really hard to find God in all of that. That I was going to need to sort through all the false, and if you're just listening and not watching, there's a lot of air quotes going to go on here, but false ideas and experiences so that I could find the true God.
I see.
That was what I was going in with. But early into my first trip, I found the complete opposite to be true, that it felt like there was less, if any, separation between this material and divine that we often separate.
In a lot of ways
felt
they're further along than evangelical Christians.
Oh, definitely. Everything felt spiritual, and it's a really embodied feeling that's really hard to describe in words. But I can remember sitting on these makeshift platforms surrounded by tons of people with drums playing and children running around, and they'd be tossing marigold petals, which was a sign of blessing, and sharing cups of chai. And I just remember looking around and expecting to feel really overwhelmed, and instead it was just this feeling of absolute peace. And I don't want to romanticize the realities of people that we were meeting with, which I think is what I kind of tried to do immediately after. But I do think it's possible to hold all of that and hold this really profound hospitality and joy that I experienced that I hadn't experienced anywhere else before. And that changed me. And it changed my perception of closeness with God, I think is the really big takeaway there, that this embodied feeling of how saturated everything really felt spiritually.
I love that. I love that. In some ways, you can't get around experiences where a group will go in, intentionally into a different culture. There's always going to be layered dynamics of outsiders and insiders. And so in one sense, you are an outsider because you're not in your home culture, right? But in another sense, like you said, you can't help but separate experiences like this from this sort of like colonizing thing where in the global world, you're kind of the insider and everybody else who's not in the Western, white-led world is the outsider. So there's all of these layers of challenging outsider-insider experiences. And I think that outsiders and insiders is an important thing to be mindful of when we talk about eye-opening experiences. And if we can go back to this passage from this Road to Emmaus passage, and maybe I'll put it up on the screen just so we can, as I'm talking, you can kind of remind yourself where we're looking at. I think there are lots of little instances here where we have one read of this that has really helped me is from a Catholic teacher named Father James Allison, who explains this episode is where outsiders keep becoming insiders, which is a classic sort of Jesus tradition story that we might tell. The last shall be first and the first shall be last, which is like we sang today in one of our songs. There in one of these moments here, you can see they ask, "Are you the only stranger in Jerusalem who hasn't heard what's going on?" And Father Allison suggests that line, "stranger in Jerusalem," the best English translation of that phrase. Stranger maybe doesn't quite get it. Maybe the best word that we might use, or a phrase that we might use today, is resident alien. That would be a phrase that would more closely evoke what's being expressed there. And so you wonder, if somebody's using that sort of way to address somebody else. Are you the only clearly you're not from around here? Would be kind of like what we would say colloquially. I wonder what made them say that. Was it how the stranger looked? Was it how the stranger talked? Was it their dialect? Was it their accent? Was it the way that they presented themselves? Did they not get the cultural in, what you're supposed to do? Did they not shake hands? Did that, what are the things you're supposed to do when you meet somebody on the road? And apparently Jesus, the stranger here, gives away that they're an outsider immediately. But what happens in the story is the outsider becomes the insider. Those who are supposedly in, who didn't you hear what happened here? Suddenly have their eyes opened. There's multiple layers of this happening in the story where we see later on it says that some of the women said that Jesus wasn't there. Now we needed to go check that out, obviously, because women are not trustworthy. But then the women are vindicated. The women were right. And so there's another layer of societal outsiders becoming the insiders and the insiders becoming the outsiders. The guest who is, the stranger on the road, by the time he's about to leave, they're like, no, please come and be with us. And then as they're sitting at the table, who is the one breaking the bread that is sharing and leading the feast? It is the stranger, and they realize that this is Jesus. And so there's all of these layers of the outsider becomes the insider, and that being what's happening with a lot of eye-opening experiences that we have. And I think that anytime we're talking about these both and things, these ways that I must not be able to experience God or spirituality or purpose or whatever it is because of fill in the blank. It's often because we're calling ourselves an outsider, and we're insistent for the insiders, I get that happens. But me, I just think we often, I think, talk about imposter syndrome when it comes to spirituality. We just kind of all tell the story of ourselves as an outsider. And I love this story because it's kind of great, yep, and that's where God is. So it's you can't use that defense to say and I don't think we say that to gaslight ourselves. You are experiencing God. You're experiencing God. I think it's the idea of we don't consider ourselves capable or of capacity or good enough to experience God. And this story is just that's not even what this is about. Of course you can experience God. So that's what really speaks to me in when we read this Emmaus passage.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that ties into another lens that we can look at this from, this idea of moving from experiencing God through like the cerebral or logical or intellectual in moving toward experiencing God in the embodied and relational, because we set all these parameters around what it means to actually experience God, and we kind of narrow that way.
Did you hear something in your head? Were you reading the Bible and had an epiphany or something like that? All very heady.
Yes.
Very, very in your, yes, yeah. Continue, embodied, yeah.
Yeah, so as I was rereading this this week, something that stayed with me was that Jesus wasn't recognized when they're talking along the way, and as he's explaining parts of Scripture, these conversations on reasoning and theology, instead he's recognized when he breaks bread, blesses it, and shares it with them. So it's this embodied nature of sharing a meal together that's really reminiscent of the practice of communion, which we do every week.
I love this. So, like, what was the most God experiential moment in that whole episode? It was when they were eating around a table.
Yes.
Is that, we don't call that prayer, but what if that's prayer?
It is,
I love it.
And I think it's especially refreshing for me as someone who spent a lot of time and energy in academic settings for this to be the case, that it's Jesus is recognized in these relational embodied practices and not in all of the theological discourse. And I think you can take theological and replace it with whatever quality a particular community really prioritizes. You've talked about so far, this idea of, you need to experience God through the contemplative and the introspective or the charismatic and extroverted and things like that.
I think that's a lot of people's experiences, yeah.
And it's not to set experiences against each other, like not to say that one is in opposition to the other, the intellectual is in opposition to the embodied. That's not the case. But I think it's really this idea of expanding the possible avenues that we can take to experience God, that there's more access points. Because the real danger here is the movement from claiming that there's only particular ways you can experience God to there are only certain people that can experience God. And that is really dangerous.
Yes.
Yeah. But another thing with this, too, is that this passage often fits the description of a conversion story. So going from not seeing to seeing, not knowing Jesus to knowing Jesus. I grew up in a religious culture where testimony stories were really emphasized. So it was a really big deal to share your kind of like before and after, worthless sinner to saved believer type of a thing. And this story was used as an example of a before and after. But I don't really see that when I read it. I think it's more of an expanding. They see in part, they have some understanding, they don't see fully, and then their eyes are more opened after sharing a meal.
Yes.
It's not a before and after. There's a really great Sue Monk Kidd quote that I've brought up before, where she says, always we are waking up and waking up some more.
Yeah.
And I love this because it keeps us from sorting ourselves into before and afters, and from doing that to others too, that there's, assuming that there's like some enlightened, awakened, arrived status that you can achieve, and that status comes with more clear experiences of God.
Yeah.
And that's simply not the case.
I mean, how cruel is that when we sort of live into the reality that it must be true, and because I'm not having it, therefore I am not arrived. And you just kind of feel bad about yourself constantly because you're not there.
Yeah, but instead this is permission to just keep waking up, keep realizing, keep learning and growing and seeking. And I think there's a helpful piece of the story here where after Jesus leaves, they look back at their time and they say, like, we're not our hearts burning with the...
how many...
so dramatic.
If I had a dime every time I said to that to somebody. Was not my heart burning within me when Liverpool scored that goal?
Aside from that, I wonder...
Hey, I have transcendent experiences of God watching Liverpool play soccer. It's beautiful. Yeah.
More avenues to God, not less.
Thank you. Expansion, yeah.
But it's this idea of being able to name God's presence in retrospect. And I wonder if that has happened to you, where you can kind of look back and see, like, oh, I think that I actually was experiencing some form of God with me in that moment.
Well, and that's encouraging because even then when we have been in a space, because maybe that's happened, maybe that's compounded over many years, where it's like I've had experiences, but I can actually look back and reclaim something from my past and say, like, I might experience God in the present by remembering that story that happened to me, that experience that happened to me, perhaps God was a part of that. And that can speak to me even in the present. Like that's a beautiful thing that can reclaim maybe seasons of our lives that have felt more devoid because the pictures of what it looks like to experience God were so narrow. And this allows us to expand even as we look at our past.
Yeah, and I think it's really anchoring to be able to do that it's not experiencing God isn't reserved for all of the arrived people, like all of the afters. The two that are walking on the road with Jesus directly don't get it, and they don't have the full picture, and they still have an active experience of God.
That's exactly right. And if anything, in the story, they are the insiders, and so it's like they're the people who should be experiencing it. But even that, it's like, no, we're talking about a different thing here when we talk about experience of God. There's something else going on. Yeah.
There's a Rachel Held Evans children's book that we've had in our kids' church before we've used, called What is God Like? And it's my son Ollie's favorite right now, but it has all these different metaphors and imagery of what God is like. And the last page simply says that we can know what God is like by thinking about what makes us feel safe, what makes us feel brave, and what makes us feel loved. And I love that idea of looking at our present experiences and looking at our past experiences through that lens of what made me feel safe, what made me feel brave, and what made me feel loved. And can I name that as the presence of God?
Can you name that as the presence of God? I mean, that is, you talk about people who are trying to sort through what are my experiences of transcendence when I live in that immanent frame. That is a wonderful way to do that. That's great. That's great. Yeah. Maybe I'll say just, briefly, a story that comes to mind for me when I think about naming things as, or experiencing something and calling it like, wow, that was a moment of experiencing God, even though I default so much to a different thing in my immanent frame. I remember very early on in the life of this church when we were mostly just dinner groups meeting, and we did have some things happening on a Sunday, but we were mostly just people who were gathering in the middle of the week for dinner. And then we would, just talk about life and go around in a circle and share what's hard and take some time to pray for one another. And there was one moment that really stands out to me where one person who was in their first year teaching, and if anybody has ever been in a first year of school teaching, it is a trial by fire, and you will know how difficult that is. So this person in the group was in their first year teaching, and they were just they were a shell of themselves. It was so hard because I cared for them so much, but they were just. It was clear that they were exhausted all the time, unsure about who they were and whether they believed in themselves or whether anyone believed in them. And so they were sharing some hard things about their care and the difficulty that it was to care because it felt like it was so worthless to care, but also they couldn't help but care, and they're sharing that. And then another friend in the group who I think even to this day I'm still in touch with him a little bit. Is not really sure where on that whole I'm a skeptic and a believer at the same time. That's totally him. He doesn't really know what he regards as anything. And so he was there because he cares about he likes doing communal things. And he said to this friend who had just shared, this first year teacher, he was not one usually to share encouragements when we would go around because I think that felt a little bit too much like prayer, and that was a little bit. He says, I just want you to know that when you talk about this, it's really beautiful. And I think that's probably hard for you to see because it's all that you're sharing is so hard. And he says, I don't want to say that to belittle what you're saying, but it's beautiful to see you care. And in that moment for me, I was like, God is here. It was so powerful. It was beautiful to me to experience that. And I don't know how my friend regarded that. I don't know how this first year teacher, I think she was moved, but that I look back and I think, that's what it means. That's what it means to tell stories like Luke tells about these two people on the road today. That's what it looks like, is to look for those types of things. And the word that one writer has given me to explain that is resonance. I think we are looking for experiences of resonance. That is when a tuning fork, is right here, and then I play a note. Eventually, the tuning fork will ring at the same note as the other thing, and it's like when you have two things that are suddenly ringing at the same note. It's an experience of resonance, and that's what I had in that moment in that group. And I think those are that's what my antenna is up for when I'm thinking about what does it mean to experience God. When I have an experience of resonance.
I love that. When I think of having experiences of resonance, there's this Mary Oliver line that I love where she says, I don't know exactly what a prayer is. I do know how to pay attention. Yes. And I think that really is where resonance comes from, is just simply paying attention to what's around us.
What am I ringing in sync with?
Yes. And maybe sometimes it's the like beautifully profound and overwhelming, but maybe it's also just the really simplistic.
Yep.
This is the same poem that we get, the classic quote, the tell me, what is it you plan to do with your one wild and precious
Wild and
life?
precious life, yeah. That's that quote that made Mary Oliver famous as a poet, yeah.
And I think it's really important because that gets used out of context so much that her answer isn't to what do you do with your life? It's not be more productive or figure this out or do things the right way or all of these things that I think get really prioritized in a lot of different communities, but especially in religious communities. Instead, it's not push to succeed or make more money. It's be curious, pay attention, and lay down. Like be in the grass, just lay down, stroll through the fields. You can't argue or reason your way into finding meaning a lot of the time.
Yeah.
It just comes from these resonant experiences of paying attention.
Break bread with
Yes,
friends.
yes, and
Ask questions, yeah.
It's so different from this push to like accelerate and accumulate, or even in religious context, the idea of having like mountaintop experiences of God. Like this is just far more humble and sustainable and hopeful.
Even I will say, and I want to say this with. I want to say this carefully, but I think even the idea of something that we hold really dear, personal growth, what in many Christian traditions would be called discipleship, which is incredibly important. And that's why I want to say this with, I'm not saying I don't care about personal growth. We care deeply about personal growth. We are always talking about that. But there is a way that we can idolize personal growth or discipleship that does not allow for the seasons that we do need to just lay down and be in the grass and not push ourselves. Like I was speaking with a friend this week of just like being in a season where maybe you're in a season to not do the deepest push yourself work of personal growth. Maybe you're in a season where you need to like just pay attention, and sit and slow yourself. And so even these really, really good pursuits that that in general we're all about there's that both and again, right? Like we have to find ways for us to embrace those, but also not let any of those rule our lives and become a cruel taskmaster over us. That's not where we find God. Whether it's the both and or the outsider becoming the insider, whatever image helps you to remind you that's what we need to keep front and center is there will be both seasons in our lives. Sometimes it is going to be push, grow, and other times it's going to be lay in the grass, pay attention. Do not try to be overly productive.
It really is just an invitation to slow down and pay attention to whatever is in front of you, whether it is things that are, I don't know, pay attention if you're in the stage of go. But also pay attention in the slowing down and in the simplicity of sharing a meal with people and paying attention to your needs. But as we close, I really would love to actually pray these words from Mary Oliver, just as an exercise. This is her poem, The Summer Day. So if you are in Chicago and lovingly looking back at 2 weeks ago and it was like 75 and
Easter
sunny.
Sunday was amazing.
It was so nice. And are a little disappointed. Maybe this will help transport you into more summery imagery here. But I think just looking to her words as this concrete reminder of what it means to pay attention, what it means to be open and to look for more avenues toward experiencing God, not toward placing limitations on our experiences or on anyone else's. So, would you pray these words with me? Who made the world? Who made the swan and the black bear? Who made the grasshopper? This grasshopper, I mean. The one who has flung herself out of the grass, the one who is eating sugar out of my hand, who is moving her jaws back and forth instead of up and down, who is gazing around her with enormous and complicated eyes. Now she lifts her pale forearms and thoroughly washes her face. Now she snaps her wings open and floats away. I don't know exactly what a prayer is. I do know how to pay attention, how to fall down into the grass, how to kneel down in the grass, how to be idle and blessed, how to stroll through the fields, which is what I have been doing all day. Tell me, what else should I have done? Doesn't everything die at last and too soon? Tell me, What is it you plan to do with your one wild and precious life? Amen.
Amen. That's good. That's good, Mary Oliver. And what bring us back to the three things to pay attention to for finding God from Rachel Held Evans. It was
What makes you feel safe, what makes you feel brave, and what makes you feel loved.
excellent. Okay.
I have a little picture actually from the book itself,
nice.
so it has the illustrations. I'll put that on Discord.
Drop it in Discord. Yeah, that's good. All right. Well, it's good marching orders for us this week. Marching orders. That's too that's bad imagery. That's good things for us to think about this week.
Encouragement.
Yes, encouragement for this week. Thank you, Haley. All right. Appreciate that. Hey, y'all. This was good. I'm even thinking for my own week ahead about like how I'm going to be classifying things as experiencing God or not, and I hope that feels like a more encouraging, fun, interesting, curious project for you this week ahead. As we look ahead here at Brown Line Church, we have one more message next week that will be inspired by these same. We've been looking at these scriptures of people experiencing the risen Jesus. So we'll have one more Sunday next week along those lines. And then we have a special service on May 7th. May 7th will be our spring baby dedications. Excited about that? I have a little one who's going to be a part of that, so Eden is objectively the cutest baby in the church. Sorry, everybody else. I love your babies. They are second place to Eden. Don't argue with me, it's science. But that is May 7th, so we'd love to, it always ends up being a special day when we have baby dedication, so we'd love for you to join us then. If you are not sure if we have your contact information yet, or if you're new or you're newer with us and you know that we don't have your contact information, you can fill out our online Connect card by following this QR code that we're putting up on the screen. Haley and I will follow up with you because we love to get together with people who are connecting with our church and hear how you found us and hear why you're drawn to what we're doing here. So let us know. You can always go to our website to fill that out too if you missed the QR code. Other ways to find out what's going on with Brown Line Church is to follow us on social at Brown Line Church. All of our previous messages are available via YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts if you just search for Brown Line Church. If you would like to meet some other people in this church in smaller groups, that's how most people start to make friends and that this community starts to feel like home for people. Haley is our connections pastor, and so that's one of the primary things that she does for our church is help people connect with other groups and other people who are looking to do some of the same things. You can always learn about or like get connected with Haley so she can connect to you by going to our website, brownlinechurch.org/smallgroups. A couple of specific things. We have a Saturday morning online women's group that has been meeting, and they use Discord. So if you've ever joined our Discord here for a Sunday, you already know how to join that. It's like a Zoom, but you're doing it through Discord. And that is open invite right now. The next meeting for that crew is going to be Saturday, April 29th. And so they wanted to spread the word that that is open invite, that they would love to connect with some more women if you'd be interested in that. This is a share and prayer format. So it's a little bit like what I was describing before about the dinner group I was a part of, where we would share about what's going on in our lives and then pray and encourage one another. Several of our over 60 women in our community are connected already to this group, so if that's you and you're looking for some peers, look no further. And to get connected with that group, you can fill out our small group form online, or just let Haley know and she will connect you with that. So that's a specific thing that's going on that we wanted to highlight this week. Thank you to everybody who is a donor. Thank you to everybody who volunteers for our church. We'll put a quick financial update on the screen. But if you get something out of this community or you believe in the vision of this church, we would be so honored if you would give, if you would donate. That is how we keep the lights on, how we turn the Davis Theater into a church, and how our pastors pay the bills. And then there are plenty of other ways to give of your time and skills in addition to donating. If you want to help us turn the Davis into a church, we have a team of volunteers every Sunday that is that helps do that. If you love kids, we would love to help you or connect you with our kids church. If you're up for coming early or staying late, or if you have special skills, like if you have tech know-how or project management, or if you have a car, there are various errands that need to be run every week. Also, some specific needs that not many people will have, but you might have. If you are skilled in grant writing or event planning, we have some projects that we would love your help with over the summer. So grant writing or event planning, come and talk with me or shoot me an email. I would love to talk with you. All right. Let me take us to, as we close every service together, every week we reenact the practice of communion. Again, a meal imagery of Jesus around a table with his closest friends. And it gives us the opportunity to acknowledge that we all need nourishment. And so we are fed spiritually as we gather at a table with God and with one another. We do this by sharing the bread and the cup, symbolizing Jesus' body broken and blood shed on the cross, which is not about, we don't remember this to satisfy the wrath of an angry God. That's not what we're remembering, but rather we are seeing God as our fellow experiencer, even in suffering. Most specifically in suffering is where we find God. God knows what it is like to be in solidarity with the humanity in the world, and so we look to that God that knows these things as we share a table with each other and with God. What we'll do here to capture the feel of a meal is, in a moment, I'm going to ask everybody to stand up, and then we're going to pass through the room some cups and some juice. We're going to pass through the room some crackers. As those baskets come to you, you can take something to participate that way. If you have something else with you to eat or drink, you are welcome to use that. If you're joining online, grab something to eat and drink, and you can join with us that way. And once the baskets have made their way through the whole room so everybody has something, I'll come back up here and I'll pray over all of us. We'll take the elements together. So with that said, let me ask everybody to stand, and we'll get everything passed through the room. All right, everyone, if I can have your attention back here, I'm just going to interrupt your conversation just for a moment. I promise you can go back to it. Oh, I disappeared. Here I am. I'm back. All right. Would you pray with me? On the night Jesus was betrayed, he broke bread, gave thanks, shared it with his disciples, and said, "Eat this, and when you do, do so in remembrance of me." When supper was ended, he took the cup. He shared it with his disciples. He said, "Drink this, and when you do, do so in remembrance of me." Jesus, we pray that specifically that image of you, the outsider becoming the one that brings us God in this picture of the story of the walk to Emmaus, that would be firm in our mind, that we would see you there, we would see you holding many of these both ands that we've discussed, and we would see you expanding the ways that we might call our everyday experience of God. We thank you for the things we've been able to reflect on today, the experiences we've had. We pray for more this week. In Jesus' name, amen. Great to be with you all, and we will see you next Sunday.